Back to Heaven Official's Blessing, chapter 6 of a LGBT novel, Chinese web novel that I am quite fond of. We got through the first 5 chapters last Saturday, and we're going to continue on today once we got some folks showing up. I'll give a quick recap of what people have missed, and then we'll get going from there. Let's check settings. Let's see here. Okay, looks like that's good. Let's fix this. I don't remember where I put my files. Whoops. I'm not good at organizing things. It's just not my skill. Did that go? Oh boy. It's around here somewhere. I'll find it later. Oh well. Okay, I give up. I'll save that. Oh, I see folks are here. Hello. One sec, let me... Oh, no, it's not made for kids. Thank you, YouTube. Hey, Pablo, Billy, Hard and Long, Julie, hello. Thanks for joining us. We'll give it a few minutes before we get started. Let me pull this back up. There we go. So the story we're reading is called Heaven Official's Blessing. It is a Chinese web novel set in what's called a Zanxia genre, where it's in ancient historical fantasy China, where people have magic powers and things of that nature. The main character is Xie Lian, a god who has something of a bad reputation because he's made some mistakes, he's done some things that ended badly, so the gods and the humans don't like him very much. He doesn't really have any believers or followers. He's considered bad luck. But he's trying to reform his reputation and has taken a quest from the Emperor of Heaven, basically trying to solve a mystery in order to earn a little goodwill. He has 2 minor gods that are helping him, who are, I guess, disciples of old friends of his that they don't really like him anymore, because bad luck god. But they're helping him out, and they are trying to solve a mystery where this one region of China, for the last 17 years or so, anyone that gets married there, the bride gets murdered, or kidnapped, or what have you. So they're trying to figure out why these brides keep vanishing on their wedding day. So we are at chapter 6. The ghost holds a wedding. The crown prince climbs onto the marriage sedan. One of the people carrying the sedan hadn't been careful enough. Oh, now that I need to explain this. We ended day before yesterday. We ended with, a wedding procession was coming through, and Xie Lian was watching the wedding procession and saw that it was a doll sitting in the wedding carriage instead of a woman, and the doll fell out of the carriage and fell apart, and people started freaking out because it was a doll. So now we're going to see what's happened now that this doll apparently was sitting in the carriage instead of a person. One of the people carrying the sedan hadn't been careful enough and stepped right onto an arm. Thus, they took the lead and started screaming first. In response, the crowd responsible for delivering the wife immediately exploded. A passerby from who knows where fished out a shining white broadsword before yelling, "What's wrong? Did it come?" What happened next was basically the street becoming a complete mess. When Xie Lian once again focused his gaze onto what had fallen out of the sedan, he realized the separated head wasn't from a living person. It was the head of a wooden doll. Fu Yao once again remarked, "Too ugly." Coincidentally, at this moment, the tea sommelier approached with a copper teapot. Xie Lian remembered the tea sommelier's expression from yesterday and asked, Mister, yesterday I saw these people making a fuss on the streets, and today they're here again. What are they doing? The tea sommelier replied, they're trying to die. Xie Lian wasn't surprised at his answer and asked another question. Are they trying to trick the ghost bridegroom to come out? One sec, cat at the door. Hello, kitty. You want to come in? Hello, kitty. Hello. The tea sommelier responded, what else do you think they're trying to do? A missing bride's father offered an extremely large monetary reward for anyone who managed to catch that ghost bridegroom and help find his daughter. That's why the crowd of people created this disturbance and foul atmosphere all day long. The father who'd offered that reward was probably the official they had previously discussed. Xie Lian took another look at the roughly made woman's head lying on the ground and immediately understood these people had wanted to disguise the doll as a new bride. Aw, thank you, Pablo. That's very kind of you. And Rainbow, very appropriate. Thank you. Hey, Radiant Goddess, welcome. Lots of new folks in the stream today. Let's see here. Okay. Let's see here. Where are we? He heard Fu Yao speak in a repulsed manner. If I was the ghost bridegroom and someone gifted me an ugly thing like this, I would wipe out this town. He's such a little asshole. Hearing that, Xie Lian reprimanded him. Fu Yao, those words aren't something an immortal like you should say. Furthermore, can you correct that rolling eye habit of yours? It would be best if you could set small goals for yourself first, like only rolling your eyes 5 times a day and so on. Everyone's so sassy in this story. Hey, E.T. Nan Fang spoke up as well. Even if you give him a goal of rolling his eyes only 50 times a day, he still wouldn't be able to accomplish it. At that moment, a youngster suddenly emerged from the crowd outside. Trembling with enthusiasm, it looked as if he was one of their leaders. The youngster waved his arms before yelling in a loud voice, Listen to me! Listen to me! Continuing like this is completely useless. How many rounds did we make these past few days? And have we managed to trick the ghost bridegroom out? One after another, the buff men began to grumble and agree with him. Seeing that, the youngster continued talking. In my opinion, since we started this, we must carry through no matter what happens. It would be better to just directly rush into Mount Yujun. Everyone can search the mountain before catching and killing that ugly creature. I'll take the lead. Any brave and proper man can follow me. After we kill the ugly creature, we can share the reward. In the beginning, only a few sparse men yelled in agreement. Gradually, however, the voices of agreement grew until everyone was responding in an affirmative tone. They unexpectedly sounded quite powerful. On the other hand, Xie Lian asked, Ugly creature? Mister, what is the matter behind this ugly creature they're talking about? The tea sommelier replied, Rumors say the ghost bridegroom is an ugly creature that lives on Mount Yujun. Because he was born too ugly, no women would have him. This is why his heart gave birth to resentment, and why he would snatch other men's brides to prevent couples from experiencing a happy occasion. There were no records of this on the scroll given to him by Lin Wen's palace hall. Xie Lian asked again, Do people actually say this? Isn't this just speculation? The tea sommelier responded, Who knows? But it is said that many people have seen the ghost bridegroom before. Something about how his whole face is wrapped in bandages, leaving only his fierce eyes uncovered, and he cannot speak, but rather roars like a beast. Currently, these rumors are circulating everywhere. Fu Yao retorted, Covering his face with bandages doesn't necessarily mean he's ugly. It could also be because he's too beautiful, so he doesn't want people to see him. The tea sommelier was speechless for a moment before saying, Who knows? In any case, I haven't seen him. At that moment, a young girl's voice emerged outside on the streets. She said, You guys, don't listen to him. Don't go. Mount Yujun is very dangerous. The one who had spoken was the girl hiding at the corner of the street. She was also the girl who had been praying in Fengxin's temple yesterday, Little Ying. So yesterday when they were in the temple and a young girl came and prayed and she had her skirt ripped and Xie Lian helped her, that's this girl. The moment Xie Lian saw her, his face started hurting. Unconsciously, he raised his hand and rubbed his cheek. When the youngster saw her, his face turned a bit ugly. He pushed her out of the way before saying, "Us menfolk are speaking, so what is a little girl like you butting in for?" Little Ying cowered and shrank back a bit after being pushed. However, she seemed to summon up all her courage before softly speaking again. "Don't listen to him. Whether it's pretending to hold a fake wedding or searching the mountain, these tasks are all so dangerous. Aren't you just sending yourselves off to death?" The youngster replied, "You can only say these pleasant words. All of us are working together and staking our lives to help the people rid of evil. And you're just a selfish girl, one who refused to disguise yourself as a bride and sit on the sedan chair. You can't even muster up the courage, even if it could help everybody. And now you're running over here to hinder us again. What do you want to do?" The youngster pushed the girl once for every sentence he said. Seeing this, the people in the tea house couldn't help but frown. Xie Lian lowered his head and focused on removing the bandages on his wrist. As he did this, he heard the tea sommelier explain. The young leader previously wanted to coax that girl in disguising herself as the bride. At the time he said so many sweet words it was like his mouth had been rubbed with honey. But after the girl refused, he flipped his face and became like this. On the street, the group of buff men shouted, "Stop standing here and blocking the road. Go to the side!" When little Ying saw this, her face became completely red as tears started swirling in her eyes. She asked, "Why do you have to say it like that?" The youngster spoke up again. "Everything I said was the truth, wasn't it? I asked if you could disguise yourself as a fake bride, and you wouldn't do it no matter what." Little Ying replied, "Yes, I don't dare to. However, you didn't have to tear open my dress." The moment she mentioned this, it was like she had jabbed the youngster's sore spot. He immediately jumped up and refuted. "An ugly person like you shouldn't randomly spray blood at people and accuse them. I teared your dress? Do you think I'm blind? Who knows, maybe you just wanted to show yourself to other people, so you ripped it yourself. Who knows, your face is this ugly, even if your dress is torn, maybe nobody would want to look. Don't try to pin the blame onto my head." Nanfang really couldn't continue to listen to this. With a ka-cha, the teacup in his hand cracked and broke into pieces. However, just as he was about to get up, a white shadow floated past him, and the youngster, who'd been holding himself up high above the girl, suddenly shouted. He face-planted into the dirt before falling on his blood as blood started dripping from his fingers. He fell on his blood. No one had enough time to figure out what had happened, for he was already sitting on the ground. Thus, people thought little Ying had been the one to injure him. However, who knew that when they turned their gazes back to little Ying, they could no longer see her. Instead, a Taoist wearing white stood in front of her. Both of Xie Lian's hands were tucked into his sleeves. He didn't even look around at the boy, and just watched little Ying with a smile. Slightly bending down so he was at the same level as her, Xie Lian asked, "Young lady, I wonder if I can invite you inside to drink a cup of tea with me." The youngster sitting on the ground felt as though his nose and mouth were hurting terribly. Actually, his whole face was hurting so much it felt as if he'd been smacked with a steel whip. However, the Taoist in front of him clearly didn't have any weapons. In addition, he didn't see when the Taoist had made his move, or how he had made his move. Thus, the youngster stumbled and managed to climb to his feet before pointing his sword at the man. "This person used a demonic art!" The moment the group of men behind the youngster heard the words demonic art, they all raised their swords against Xie Lian. However, they never would have expected Nanfang, who was behind Xie Lian, to suddenly thrust out his palm. Following another ka-cha sound, the pillar beside them completely collapsed. When they saw that display of divine power, the complexion of all the buff men simultaneously changed. The youngster also began mentally cowering in his heart, but he was still reluctant to admit his fault. Instead, he charged toward them as he loudly yelled, "Today I'll admit defeat here. Which Taoist path are you from? Leave your name, and in the future we can meet again to settle this account." Nanfang completely didn't bother to reply, but Fu Yao beside him piped up, Not a problem, not a problem. This person's from the..." Nanfang thrust another palm at Fu Yao, and once again the two of them started fighting. Because he was going to say, "He's from the fertility temple." On the other hand, Xie Lian originally wanted to invite the girl inside to sit for a bit, and then help her order some tea and other snacks. However, little Ying rubbed away her own tears before leaving. Thus, Xie Lian could only sigh and watch her leaving before walking back into the tea house himself. When he came inside, the tea sommelier reminded him, "Remember to pay for the pillar." Thus, when Xie Lian sat down again, he faced Nanfang and said, "Remember to pay for the pillar." Xie Lian continued, Before that, however, we should manage our proper work. Could someone lend me some spiritual power? I need to enter the spirit array and verify some information. Nan Feng raised a hand. The two of them clapped hands together, establishing what was considered to be an extremely simple contract. With this, Xie Lian was able to enter the spirit array again. The moment he entered the array, he heard Ling Wen speak. Remember that the array is like Discord for gods. They can all jump in there and chat and say, hey, what's up? Xie Lian has to borrow other people's powers because he's been so demoted, he really doesn't have that much power of his own. He has to borrow a spiritual energy from other people. So he heard Ling Wen speak. Your Highness finally managed to borrow some spiritual power. Is everything at the north advancing smoothly? How are the two small martial gods who willingly offered a helping hand? Xie Lian raised his head. He looked at the pillar that had crumbled because of Nan Feng before taking another look at the indifferent Fu Yao, who was closing his eyes and meditating. Then Xie Lian replied, each of the two gods have their own merits, and they're capable individuals. A hint of a smile could be heard when Ling Wen spoke again. Then we truly have to congratulate General Nan Yang and General Zuan Zhen. According to His Highness's words, these two gods have boundless prospects. Ascending may even be an imminent event. However, a quick moment after Ling Wen finished speaking. I'll be right back. I gotta check what's going on downstairs. Sorry about that. We had a doggy that wanted attention. Alright. We were talking to Ling Wen. Okay. Okay. So she was talking about, hey, how are those two mini gods? How are they doing? And Xie Lian was like, they're doing pretty great. And so Ling Wen says, their bosses will be so happy about this. And so now their bosses are going to show up. A quick moment after Ling Wen finished speaking, Mu Qing's cold voice floated out. He didn't inform me of this adventure of his and left just like that. I was truly ignorant about this. Hearing that, Xie Lian thought to himself, you're really guarding the spirit array all day long. Ignoring Mu Qing, Ling Wen continued to speak. Your Highness, where are you right now? General Pei is the deity who watches over the north, and his incense there burns quite prosperously. If your Highness is in need, you could temporarily stay at one of his temples. Xie Lian replied, there's no need to trouble him. We didn't find a temple in the vicinity and then settled at a Nanyang temple. But I do have a quick question, Ling Wen, concerning the ghost bridegroom. Do you have more information regarding this case? Ling Wen responded, we do. Just a while ago, my palace hall gauged the rating of the ghost. He should be of the Wrath rank. Wrath? For for the demons and ghosts that wreaked havoc on the mortal realm. The Lingwen Palace Hall classified them into 4 ranks according to their abilities. These 4 ranks were the fierce, the severe, the wrath, and the devastation. Hello, new folks hopping in. Welcome. Ghosts from the fierce rank had the capability to kill single targets. Severe ranked monsters could wipe out a household, while wrath ranked ghosts could massacre a whole city. The most terrifying of them all was the devastation rank. When one was born, it could destroy a country and cause suffering to the people, turning the whole mortal realm into a mess. The ghost bridegroom hiding on Mount Yujun was of the wrath rank, second only to the terrifying devastation rank. Since that was the case, anyone who managed to catch a glimpse of him shouldn't have escaped unscathed. Thus, when Xie Lian retreated from the spirit array and informed the other 2 gods of what he'd learned, Nanfang remarked, "If that's true, then the information about the ugly creature or the man covered in bandages were just complete rumors. It's either that or people who claim to see those things instead saw something else, not the bridegroom." Hi, Jono. Xie Lian mentioned his own theory. There's another possibility. Perhaps the ghost bridegroom wouldn't or couldn't hurt people under certain circumstances. So they're saying that this person that people have seen on the mountain couldn't possibly be the bridegroom because people have survived seeing him and he looks so ordinary. But Xie Lian's like, well, maybe sometimes he's not powerful. Maybe something's going on. They're trying to figure out what's up with this weird ghost. We need LGBT fiction that combines Silent Hill and Fatal Frame. Well, I did write some gay Silent Hill fanfic growing up. One of these days we'll have to read those horrible, horrible things. Alright. On the other hand, Fu Yao didn't add his ideas, instead criticizing. Lingwen Palace Hall has really low efficiency. It took them this long to give us a ranking of the ghost bridegroom. What's the use of telling us now? Xie Lian replied, "In the very least, we know the strength of our enemy. However, since we're dealing with a wrath rank, the spiritual strength of the ghost bridegroom must be quite high. It would be impossible to deceive him with a fake person. If we want to trick him out, we can't use the diversion tactic where the people delivering the bride to the fake wedding are disguised puppets. In addition, they can't be holding weapons. The most important aspect is the bride must be a living person." Fu Yao spoke up. We can go into the street, find a woman, and get her to be our bait. However, Nanfang immediately rejected his idea. We can't do that. Fu Yao asked why. If she isn't willing, we can give her some money, and then she'll be willing. Hearing that, Xie Lian cut into their argument. Fu Yao, even if there's a woman willing to do that, it's best we don't use that plan. The ghost bridegroom is of the wrath rank. If we mess up, we would be fine. However, if the bride gets taken away, a frail mortal girl wouldn't be able to escape or resist. If that really happened, she'd only have death waiting for her. Fu Yao stated, well, if we can't find a woman, then we can only find a man. Nanfang questioned, where are we going to find a man who would be willing to disguise himself as... He hadn't even finished speaking when both his and Fu Yao's line of sight started shifting over. Xie Lian was still smiling gently. Huh? In the evening, at the Nan Yang Temple. Xie Lian popped out of the temple with completely disheveled hair. The moment the 2 small martial guards guarding the temple door saw him, Nanfang immediately started yelling curses. With a fuck, he rushed out. Xie Lian was speechless for a moment before asking, what's worth such a reaction? If you had asked anyone to come and see, they would be able to tell with a glance this was a young boy with a gentle and handsome face. However, that was the exact reason for Nanfang's reaction. For a proper and handsome boy to wear a woman's wedding dress, the image was one where many people would be unable to directly look at it. An example would be Nanfang. He couldn't accept it, and his response was intense. So, they've disguised Xie Lian as a woman in a wedding dress. He is pretending to be a bride, so that the ghost bridegroom will not hurt a mortal woman. These kind of outfits, I should have pulled up the actual image from the manga, but in China you get married in like a really beautiful red dress with a veil. It's really pretty. Let's see here. Xie Lian saw Fu Yao was staring at him with a complicated gaze. As Fu Yao gave him a once-over, Xie Lian asked, do you have something to say? Fu Yao nodded before saying, If I was the ghost bridegroom and someone wanted to give me this kind of woman, Xie Lian finished his sentence. You'd wipe out the town? Fu Yao coldly corrected him. No, I'd kill the woman. Xie Lian smiled. Then I can only say it's fortunate I'm not actually a woman. Fu Yao suggested, I think you should try going into the array and see if there are any heavenly officials who are willing to teach you a spell to help transform your body. It would be more practical that way. There were indeed heavenly officials who, because of their particular needs, were proficient in spells that transformed their bodies. However, Xie Lian was afraid with the time left, it was already too late for him to learn a new spell. At the other end, Nanfang returned to the temple with a green face. After he finished cursing, he'd cooled down a considerable amount, a habit that was almost exactly the same as the general he served under. So there are gods who use magic to transform from male to female, animal, whatever. But Xie Lian doesn't have that ability, and he's like, it's cool, I'm just gonna wear the dress, we're fine. Xie Lian took a look at the already late night sky before saying, never mind, after you cover my head with a veil, it'll all look the same. When he was finished talking, he began to cover himself with the veil. However, Fu Yao raised his hand and said, wait a moment, you don't know how that ghost would harm people. If he takes off your veil and realizes he was tricked, something might occur when he rages. Wouldn't that create more problems? When Xie Lian heard his words, he thought they were reasonable. However, the moment he took a step forward, he heard a ripping noise. The red wedding dress Fu Yao had found for him really did not fit Xie Lian. The woman this dress was intended for had been quite petite. When Xie Lian wore it, though the waist area was unexpectedly quite fitting, raising his sleeves or lifting his feet were actions that felt extremely restrictive. In addition, the moment he made a bigger movement, the dress would get torn apart. Just as Xie Lian started looking around to find what had ripped, a voice floated out from the temple doors. Excuse me, may I ask? The three of them turned toward the sound. However, what they saw was little Ying, holding some folded white clothes as she cowardly stared at them. She explained, I remembered I encountered you here yesterday, so I decided to come and see if I could meet you again. I already washed these clothes. I'll place them here. For today and yesterday, thank you so much. Xie Lian was about to give her a smile when he suddenly realized what he currently looked like. He decided to speak less so he wouldn't scare people. Who knew that not only was little Ying not scared of him, she stepped forward and asked, if you like it, I can help you. Xie Lian replied, no, young lady, please don't misunderstand. I don't have this kind of hobby. Little Ying explained hurriedly, oh, I know. I meant was, if you don't mind me, I can help you. You guys want to catch the ghost bridegroom, right? No, wait, listen, really, I don't dress up in wedding dresses as a hobby, okay? Listen, this is for work. This is just for work. Oh, man. Both her tone and her head rose a little bit as little Ying continued. I know how to alter clothes. I always carry some needle and thread on me as well. Whatever doesn't fit, I can fix it. I also know how to do some makeup. Let me help you. After the time it took to burn 2 incense sticks, Xie Lian walked out of the temple while bowing his head. This time, the bride's veil covered his head. Nanfang and Fu Yao seemed to want to take a peek, but in the end they decided it was better to cherish their eyes. The sedan chair they found was at the front of the temple, and the carefully selected people who were supposed to carry the chair had long been waiting there. The moon was already high in the night sky. Thus, His Royal Highness the Crown Prince sat on the grand red sedan chair, clothed in a bride's wedding dress. How beautiful! Oh, this part's really lovely. So now we're on chapter 7. They're going to try and go out into the forest and get the attention of the ghost bridegroom with Xie Lian as their bait, who looks beautiful in his lovely red dress. The whole marriage sedan was covered in crimson satin. Lovely flowers, the moon, dragons, and phoenixes were sewn on with brightly colored thread. Nanfang and Fu Yao each stood on one side of the sedan, guarding the sedan from tilting to one side. Xie Lian sat upright in the middle of the sedan, swaying with the walking rhythm of the ones carrying it. In reality, the 8 people carrying the sedan were all outstanding military officials who were proficient in martial arts. In order to find people highly skilled who could disguise themselves as sedan carriers, Nanfang and Fu Yao directly went to the officials' residence and revealed their plans. They clearly explained how they wanted to go and explore Mount Yujun. Without asking any more, the official immediately pulled out a row of tall, strong martial artists. However, the reason why Nanfang and Fu Yao wanted strong fighters was not because they were hoping they could help them. Instead, they merely wanted them to be able to defend themselves and flee when the fierce ghosts began fighting back. Contrarily, these 8 military officials didn't think too highly of them. Within the government, they were all first-class experts. Why weren't they the leaders or the stars of the show? Despite that, the moment those 2 little pretty boys came, they began stepping on their heads and forcing them to become sedan carriers. It could be said they were extremely unhappy. However, their master's orders had to be followed, and thus they could only restrain the disdain in their hearts. But since they were unhappy, it was hard to avoid their anger from flaring up. This was why, from time to time, they would deliberately slip up and shake the sedan, making it jolt terribly. Outsiders wouldn't be able to tell that as long as the person sitting in the sedan was somewhat delicate, they would have vomited themselves to death. The sedan chair tilted and jolted. Sure enough, they heard Xie Lian sigh softly. A few military officials couldn't help but feel secretly pleased. Outside, Fu Yao asked in a cold tone, "Young lady, what's wrong? Marrying at such a elderly age, you're happy to the point of tears?" Indeed, when brides marry, many of them couldn't be helped but wipe their tears and cry in their marriage sedan. As for himself, when Xie Lian heard that, he didn't know whether to laugh or cry. However, when he began talking, his tone was gentle and smooth. Unexpectedly, there wasn't a trace of discomfort. "It's not that. I merely realize that this wedding procession is lacking a very important thing." Nanfang asked, "What are we missing? We already prepared all the things we ought to have." Xie Lian responded, "Maids who are accompanying the marriage." The 2 small martial gods standing outside spontaneously glanced at each other. One couldn't tell what kind of scene they imagined, but they both trembled violently. Fu Yao spoke up and said, "Just pretend your family's impoverished so there's not enough money to buy servant girls. You decided to make do." Xie Lian replied, "All right." They were making fun of him, so he was like, "You know what? We are supposed to have women helping me outside, you know. Maybe we should just, maybe you 2 should be dressed in dresses too." And they're like, "Oh, fuck. No, no, no." Oh, that's my medication alarm. I should probably take those. One sec. There we go. Alright. The military officials heard their impromptu slapstick live comedy and couldn't help but smile. The dissatisfaction in their hearts dissipated a lot, and they felt closer to the other 3. This resulted in the sedan chair becoming more stable. Xie Lian leaned back once more. Although he was still sitting upright, he closed his eyes to rest. Who knew, after a short while, a child's laughter sounded near his ears, cackling and cruel, laughing and mirthful. The sound of laughter was like a ripple as it spread through the mountains and fields. It sounded quite ethereal, but also very strange. However, the sedan chair hadn't stopped and was still advancing as steadily as before. Even Nanfang and Fu Yao didn't say anything, as if they hadn't noticed any abnormalities. Xie Lian opened his eyes before speaking in a low tone. "Nanfang, Fu Yao?" Nanfang was walking to the left side of the sedan. He asked, "What's wrong?" Xie Lian replied, "Something came." At this time, the marriage procession had already entered the depths of Mount Yojun. It was completely silent. Even the creaking noise made by the wooden sedan chair, the crunching noises of the dry leaves and branches under their feet, and the breathing sounds of the sedan carriers appeared too noisy in this quiet. And the child's laughter still hadn't disappeared. Sometimes it sounded far away, as if they were in the depths of the mountain. Other times it was very close, as if it was crawling beside the sedan. Nanfang's expression became more solemn as he said, "I don't hear anything." Fu Yao coldly spoke up, "Neither do I." As for the other sedan carriers, it was more unlikely for them to have heard anything. In response, Xie Lian said, "In that case, they are deliberately only letting me hear." The 8 military officials were originally overconfident because of their high skills in martial arts. In addition, they believed that because the ghost bridegroom randomly picked brides, they were bound to return home that night without any achievements. Thus, they hadn't been afraid at all. Now, for some reason, they couldn't help but think of those 40 officials in that wedding procession, the ones that had mysteriously disappeared. Suddenly, cold sweat began appearing on some of those sedan carriers' foreheads. Xie Lian noticed someone's footsteps stagnating and said, "Don't stop. Pretend nothing happened." Nanfang waved his hand, motioning for the military officials to keep walking. Xie Lian spoke up again and said, He's singing. Fu Yao asked, "What is he singing?" After carefully listening to the child's voice, Xie Lian began repeating the words phrase by phrase. New bride, new bride, new bride on the red marriage sedan. In the middle of this silent night, Xie Lian's slightly sluggish voice came out very crisp. Clearly, he had just been saying those words. However, those 8 military officials felt as if they could hear a child's voice singing the odd song with him. It really made one's blood run cold. Xie Lian continued, eyes brimming with tears, passing the mountain's mound. Under the veil do not hold the rising smile, ghost bride. Do they mean ghost bridegroom or something else? He paused a bit before saying, this won't work. He keeps laughing now, so the words are unclear. Nan Feng frowned. What does all of that mean? Xie Lian replied, the literal meaning. He's telling the new bride in the sedan chair she should only cry and she shouldn't smile. Nan Feng corrected his previous question. I mean, what is the meaning behind this thing running over here to remind you of that? On the other hand, Fu Yao would eternally have an opposing idea. It might not necessarily be just reminding us. It could possibly be that it's deliberately trying to make you do the wrong thing. Perhaps smiling is the real way to come out unscathed. However, its goal is to trick others to cry. It's hard to say if, in the past, other brides fell for these plans. In response to that, Xie Lian said, Fu Yao, if an ordinary bride heard this kind of voice in the middle of the road, I'm afraid she'd only be scared to death. How could she smile? In addition, whether I cry or smile, what's the worst result? Fu Yao responded, you'll get kidnapped. Thus, Xie Lian reminded him, isn't that the purpose of our trip? Fu Yao snorted, though he didn't continue to argue. Contrarily, Xie Lian spoke up again and said, also, there's something I think I should tell you guys. Nan Feng asked, what is it? Xie Lian responded, ever since I sat on the sedan, I've never stopped smiling. He had just said this when suddenly, the marriage sedan sank heavily. The 8 military officials began to immediately riot, causing the sedan to completely halt. Nan Feng shouted, everyone, don't panic! Xie Lian raised his hand slightly before asking, what happened? Fu Yao replied in a light tone, nothing more than meeting some beasts. Just as he had finished answering, Xie Lian heard a mournful wolf howl cut through the night's silence. A pack of wolves was blocking their path. No matter what, Xie Lian thought this wasn't normal. Thus he asked, may I ask, do wolf packs frequently roam the mountain? One of the military officials holding the carriage replied, I've never heard of this happening before. How could they be on Mount Yujun? Xie Lian raised his eyebrows before saying, yeah, then we've come to the right place. It was nothing more than a pack of wolves on the mountain. They weren't something difficult for Nan Feng and Fu Yao to deal with, and they weren't something scary for these military officials who regularly rolled around and fought against others. But just then, they had been pondering over the ghost bridegroom's eerie song. That had been the reason they were caught so off guard and afraid. From the darkness of the forest, many pairs of faintly green wolf eyes lit up as the wolves themselves began walking out. Quickly, they began surrounding them. However, when compared to a pack of beasts that happily found a meal, to that thing they couldn't hear nor touch, the weird thing was of course scarier. Thus, one by one, everyone began rolling their sleeves up for battle, preparing to show their talents and go on a killing spree. Unfortunately, the best part of the show had yet to come. Tightly following their steps, a rustling noise appeared, followed by a strange voice that didn't sound human, nor like a beast. A military official exclaimed in alarm, What? What is this? What is this thing? Nan Feng also began cursing. Xie Lian knew something had quickly changed and wanted to stand up. He asked, what happened now? However, Nan Feng immediately yelled, don't come out! Xie Lian raised his hand when suddenly the sedan chair began to shake. It seemed as if there was something leaning against the sedan door. Xie Lian hadn't lowered his head that much. He directed his gaze downward before seeing the back of a head of some kind of thing from the crack beneath his veil. It actually climbed into the marriage sedan. The thing had stuck its head into the sedan, but was immediately dragged out by someone outside. Nan Feng stood in front of the sedan and cursed, Fuck! It's a base slave! As soon as he heard it was a base slave, That's the country name. I keep mixing them up. Xie Lian knew things would now become troublesome. According to Ling Wen's Palace Hall's judgment, a base slave was something that couldn't even obtain the fierce rank. It was said originally base slaves were humans. However, if one looked at them now, even if they were people, one could only say they were deformed humans. It had a head and a face, but they looked vague and unclear. They had legs and arms, but they were too weak to walk on. They had a mouth and teeth, but it would take forever for them to bite someone to death. However, if they let people choose, most people would rather meet the scarier, fierce, or severe ranked monsters than meet a base slave. This was because in most cases, base slaves appeared and coordinated with other ghosts and monsters. When their prey was fighting against their enemies, they would suddenly appear. Then they would use their endlessly tangled arms and legs to stick to their prey. They had countless companions that advanced dauntlessly, all winding around their prey like sticky candy. Even though their combat strength was extremely low, they were tenacious and hard to kill. Furthermore, they usually emerged in a large group. It was pretty hard to shake them off, and it was even more difficult to quickly kill them all. Gradually, one would waste too much strength fighting them, or they would end up stumbling. As a result, they would inevitably be a short moment of carelessness, one that would let the enemy who had been waiting for an opportunity to succeed. After the prey was killed by other ghosts and monsters, the base slaves would collect the remains of the prey, those broken arms and legs, before eating them with relish. They would gnaw and nibble until they were full of holes. Base slaves were a truly disgusting existence. To a heavenly official from upper heaven, letting out divine light and pulling out their weapons were naturally enough to scare base slaves into retreating. However, to the small martial gods of middle heaven, these things were hard to deal with. From what seemed to be a distant place, Fu Yao said in a tone of revulsion, "I hate these things the most. Did Ling Wen Palace Hall mention these things?" Xie Lian responded they didn't. Fu Yao immediately retorted, "What use do those guys have?" Ignoring him, Xie Lian asked, "How many of them came?" This time it was Nan Fang who replied, "Around 100, probably more. Don't come out." For things like base slaves, the more there were, the stronger they became. When there were more than 10 of them, it would be extremely hard to deal with. More than 100 of them, there would be more than enough base slaves to drag them to death. Base slaves usually liked living in places where there were a lot of people. Thus, Xie Lian would never have expected there would be this many living on the deserted Mount Yujun. Xie Lian thought for a moment before slightly raising his arm, revealing a wrist that was half bandaged. He said, "Go ahead." The moment he said those words, those white bandages began automatically sliding off his arm, like it was alive. It flew outside by passing the curtains of the sedan. Xie Lian sat upright in the sedan before gently ordering, "Strangle them to death." In the midst of the night, a white viper suddenly swam out. When that white thin silk was bandaged around Xie Lian's wrist, it seemed to only be a few chi in length. However, when it flew as quick as lightning into the fight, it seemed as if it was infinitely long, with a crack, 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 crack. A succession of snapping sounds echoed in the air. In the blink of an eye, dozens of wild wolves and base slaves had their necks broken by the white silk. The 6 base slaves bothering Nan Fang instantly met a violent death and fell to the ground. He thrust out his palm and sent the last wolf flying. However, though Nan Fang had escaped the danger, he didn't relax even the slightest bit. Instead, he rushed toward the sedan and yelled in disbelief, "What is that thing? Aren't you without any spiritual power and can't activate magical artifacts?" Xie Lian responded, "There would inevitably be exceptions to everything." Nan Fang was furious. He slapped one side of the sedan carriage and roared, "Xie Lian, say it clearly. What is that thing?" The slap of his almost made the whole sedan fall apart. Thus, Xie Lian had no choice but to raise his hand and support the door. But for once, he was slightly startled. When Nan Fang said those words, his tone unexpectedly made him recall Fang Xin's appearance when he got mad in the past. Nan Fang was still waiting for an answer when suddenly the distant screams of military officials echoed through the air. Fu Yao coldly said, "If you want to talk, beat back this wave of enemies before doing it." Nan Fang had no other choice but to go back and save the show. However, Xie Lian quickly snapped out of his gaze and said, "Nan Fang, Fu Yao, you guys leave first." Nan Fang looked back. "What?" Xie Lian explained, "If you stay around the sedan chair, more will come. You won't be able to finish fighting. In that case, take the other people and leave. I'll stay behind and meet the ghost bridegroom." Nan Fang wanted to start cursing again. "Just you?" However, on the other side, Fu Yao coldly spoke up. Since he can use that silk cloth, for a while nothing will happen. If you have time to argue with him, wouldn't it be better sending that group before returning to help? I'm leaving. Fu Ya was rather confident and at ease. He was also straightforward as well. When he said he was leaving, he immediately left, not slowing down for a moment. Nan Fang clutched his teeth, knowing in his heart that the other god wasn't wrong. Thus he turned to face the remaining military officials and said, "Follow me!" Sure enough, when they were farther away from the sedan, the previous slaves and monsters were still there, but no new ones joined the fight. The two gods protected the military officials. As they fought, Fu Yao began speaking with a tone of hatred. "Ridiculous! If it were not for me..." He stopped talking. The two of them glanced at each other. Their gazes both completely strange. Fu Yao swallowed the rest of his words before returning his head. For the time being, the two put away the topic and didn't mention it again, instead continuing to hurry. Alright, so they've gone off to save the humans that they brought with them. They're running from the monsters, and now Xie Lian is left alone in his wedding sedan. The silk is called Rui. I'm gonna look up if I can see how to pronounce this word. Let's see. Nope, Google corrected the word, damn it. It is not telling me how to say it. It's Ruoye. Roy? It's Roy? No, it's probably not Roy, but that's the magical silk bandages that he has around his body. Okay. The silk Roy had already strangled all the leftover slaves and wolves that had tried pouncing onto the sedan. It flew back and began automatically and gently wrapping itself on Xie Lian's wrist once more. Xie Lian calmly and quietly sat in the marriage sedan, surrounded by the complete darkness and rustling sounds of the trees. Suddenly, everything became completely silent. The sound of the wind, the sound of the rustling trees, the shouts of the monsters. In a split second, all of that became deathly silent, as if they were afraid of something. After that, he heard light laughter. It sounded like a young man's voice, but it also sounded like the voice of a teenager. Xie Lian sat there and didn't speak, the silk wrapped around his wrist, ready to act. As long as the person who came had even the smallest trace of killing intent, it would immediately and frantically strike back with 10 times the power. Unpredictably, Xie Lian didn't meet an abrupt attack or a blast of killing intent, but something completely different. The curtain of the marriage sedan was lightly lifted. Looking through the crack of the red veil, Xie Lian saw a person extend a hand toward him. The fingers and joints of the hand were well defined. Red thread was tied around the third finger. On that slender, pale white hand, it looked as if it was a colorful and bright knot of fate. Who could it be that we've met a fated person? Someone without killing intent who showed up in our time of need to extend their hand? Who could it be? Oh my! A fated meeting! Alright, Chapter 8. Should he reach over or not? Xie Lian remained calm and collected. After all, he hadn't finished thinking things through. Should he continue acting mighty and unmovable despite encountering hardships? Or should he pretend to be a new bride who was currently scared out of her wits, one who would cowardly move backwards in an attempt to hide? The owner of the hand was quite patient and elegant. Xie Lian didn't move, so the hand didn't move either, as if the hand's owner was waiting for a reply. After quite a while, as if he'd been possessed by a demon, Xie Lian reached out his hand. He stood up and was about to push aside the curtain blocking the door so he could step down. However, the person outside was a step ahead of him, and had already raised the red curtain. The person who came held Xie Lian's hand, though he didn't grasp it too tightly, as if he were afraid he would accidentally hurt him. This created the illusion that the person was cautious and careful. Xie Lian's head was lowered. He allowed the other person to lead him before slowly leaving the sedan. When he looked down, he glimpsed a pile of wolf and base slave corpses at his feet. They looked as if they had been strangled to death by the silk cloth. Xie Lian's thoughts took a slight turn before he stumbled slightly. With a startled gasp, he began to fall forward. The person who came immediately placed his hand onto Xie Lian's back to support him. Thus, he managed to catch him before he fell. Since he supported him, Xie Lian took the opportunity to grab his wrist. However, he only felt something cold and hard. It turned out the person who came wore a pair of silver vambraces. These vambraces were gorgeous and exquisite. There were ancient patterns decorating them. Maple leaves, butterflies, sinister, ferocious beasts engraved on them. They looked quite mysterious, unlike something from the Central Plains. It looked as if they were an antique from a minor exotic tribe. They perfectly enclosed the person's wrists, making him appear refined and agile. Ice-cold silver, deathly pale hands. They seemed lifeless. However, they also seemed to contain a murderous spirit and evil intentions. Xie Lian had faked that fall of his, intending to feel the other person out. Even now, the silk was still hidden in his wide sleeves as it slowly twisted around his wrists, waiting for the moment to pounce. However, the person who came only held his hand once more before slowly leading him forward. On the one hand, Xie Lian's head was still covered with the veil, so he couldn't see clearly. On the other hand, he wanted to stall for time. This was why Xie Lian deliberately walked very slowly. However, unexpectedly, the other person cooperated with his pace and walked slowly as well. Every now and then, this person's other hand would support him and pull him along, as if he was afraid Xie Lian would fall again. Although Xie Lian was extremely vigilant and on guard, when he saw how the person treated him, he couldn't help but think, if this person really was the bridegroom, he was being truly gentle and considerate. At the time, Xie Lian heard an extremely clear, tinkling noise. Every time the two of them took a step, the clear noise would ring once again. When he was pondering over what the noise was, the suppressed roars of wild beasts abruptly appeared from all directions. Wild wolves. I wonder who this mysterious and gentle and handsome man is. I wonder when my mysterious, gentle, handsome man will appear and save me from wild wolves. Who knew that before he could do anything, the person holding his hand lightly patted his hand twice, as if comforting him, telling him not to worry. These two pats were light enough to be considered an extremely gentle move. Xie Lian was slightly startled before realizing that the low roars were already disappearing. When he tried to carefully listen again, Xie Lian discovered the wolves weren't roaring or snarling. They were whimpering. These noises were clearly the sounds a wild beast made when they were frightened to the extreme. They were whimpering. The beasts made when they were unable to take a single step, the sobs during their final struggle before death. Xie Lian's curiosity concerning the person became even stronger. At the moment, he wanted to take off his veil and take a look at him before doing anything else. However, he knew the action was not something proper. Thus, Xie Lian could only peek through the small crack in the veil, trying to piece together an image, missing the big picture. With this glimpse, Xie Lian saw the hem of a red robe, and under that red robe was a pair of black leather boots. They were currently walking at a leisurely pace. The person's pace was a bit careless, mixed with a light and brisk bounce in his step. It made him appear like a lively teenager. However, he walked as if he had a goal or destination firmly in mind, making it so no one could stop him. Whoever dared block his path would only be crushed into dust. This rather made Xie Lian unable to precisely determine what kind of person this man was. While he was turning over guesses in his I turned the word still turning into sterning. He was sterning over. I don't know why my mouth is slipping over words today. Clearly I need more coffee. While he was still turning over guesses in his mind, a white and ghastly thing suddenly appeared in his view. A skull. Xie Lian's pace stagnated for a moment. With only a single glance, Xie Lian was able to tell there was something wrong with the position of the skull. There was clearly the corner of some sort of spiritual array. If one touched it, Xie Lian was afraid the whole array would launch an attack at that point. However, with the teenager's current pace, it seemed like he hadn't noticed anything was there. Xie Lian was pondering over whether he should give him a warning when he heard a ka-cha noise. With this tragic crunching noise, Xie Lian blankly watched the person's foot step onto the skull and shatter it into dust. Then, as if he hadn't felt or noticed anything, this person indifferently stepped on the skull and kept on walking. This guy actually, with a single step, crushed the entire array into useless dust. So what that was, he noticed a skull on the ground that had been used as part of a magical protection spell, basically a shield, and he was like, oh man, that thing's powerful, I should probably warn the guy. And before he could say anything, the guy just crushed it. Just is so powerful, it couldn't withstand his foot. That's basically showing off his power at this point. At this moment, the teenager's pace suddenly paused. Xie Lian's heart moved, thinking it was because the other was about to do something. However, the teenager only stopped for a second before continuing to lead him forward. After 2 steps, some soft thudding noises echoed from above their heads, like the sound of rain hitting an umbrella. It turned out a moment ago the teenager had opened an umbrella before holding it over both their heads. Although it wasn't the time to think this, Xie Lian couldn't help but praise the teenager for being so thoughtful. However, he felt it was rather odd. Was it raining? Within the quiet, dark mountains, within the forest filled with thick weeds, in the distant depths of the mountain range, a group of wild wolves faced the moon and howled. Xie Lian didn't know if it was because a slaughtering had just occurred, but within the cold air, the light scent of blood slowly emerged. The situation and the scenery were both demonically alluring. However, the teenager held his hand with one hand and held up an umbrella with the other as he slowly led him forward. For no reason at all, this made their stroll seem romantic and flirtatious, like they were in love and inseparable. The bizarre bout of rain came in a strange manner and left in a strange manner as well. It didn't take a long while before the sound of raindrops hitting the umbrella disappeared. And the teenager also came to a halt. It seemed like he had put away his umbrella. Simultaneously, he finally let go of Xie Lian's hand before walking a step closer to him. The hand that had held his and led him all the way here lightly touched the veil before slowly lifting it up. Xie Lian had been waiting for this moment for the whole walk. He didn't move at all as he watched the lingering red curtain in front of his eyes slowly disappear. The silk cloth moved, meaning the cloth on his arms. It wasn't because the teenager had revealed killing intent. Rather, Xie Lian intended to take the initiative and attack first. They could have a nice chat after the other person was unable to move. Who would have thought that after the silk cloth flew, it brought along a burst of harsh wind. The scarlet veil left the teenager's hand, flying up and falling once more. Xie Lian only had the time to see the afterimage of a teenager dressed in red before the silk rushed over. Unexpectedly, the teenager suddenly shattered into 1,000 silver butterflies. They scattered into a burst of silvery light, looking like a glistening and dazzling stellar wind. Although this really wasn't the time or place, Xie Lian couldn't help but marvel at the scene after he retreated 2 steps. The sight was gorgeous, as if it was a fantasy scene only seen in one's dreams. At the moment, a silver butterfly began leisurely flying in front of him. Xie Lian didn't manage to carefully examine it before the butterfly flew around him twice. After that, it integrated itself back into the glistening wind, transforming into part of the silvery light filling the sky. With a flap of wings, the butterflies flew upwards. After quite a while, Xie Lian finally snapped himself out of his gaze. In his heart, he wondered, in the end, was this teenager the ghost bridegroom or not? In his opinion, he kept feeling as if the teenager wasn't. If he was the ghost bridegroom, then the wild wolves in Mount Yujun ought to have been his subordinates. If that was the case, why would they be scared when they saw him? In addition, the spiritual array they saw on the road here should have been the one set up by the ghost bridegroom. However, the teenager had just casually crushed it into dust. On the one hand, if that teenager wasn't the ghost bridegroom, why would he come to rob the sedan of its bride? Creepy and gay. I think that's what this community is all about. You're not wrong, Jeff! And this is an incredibly, really creepy introduction scene. You know, the main character is dressed as a bride and has been approached by this strange creature, kind of having like a wedding procession. You know, he finishes the procession of walking the bride to where he's trying to go, and yet Xie Lian doesn't know who this is and has no idea, and strange things keep happening, like the strange rain out of nowhere, the wolves howling, the silver butterflies, which, if you'll remember, a couple chapters before this, when he was at the tea house, Xie Lian saw a silver butterfly fly over and float on his finger and then fly away. So this isn't the first time he's seen silver butterflies. But the moment that Xie Lian tries to trap him with his silk and you know, interrogate him, the guy vanishes. So who is he? Why was he here? What's going on? Why is he so mysterious and gay? I imagine we'll find out soon. Alright. The more Xie Lian thought, the more strange he thought the situation was. Xie Lian threw the silk cloth onto his shoulders as he mentally thought, let's forget about it. There's the probability that he was someone who'd been coincidentally passing by. For now, let's put him to the side. The reason for why I'm here is what's more important. Xie Lian took a look around before letting out a surprised sound. It turned out in the distance there was actually a building. It looked quite heavy and grounded as it stood there. Since the teenager brought him here, and since the building had been painstakingly hidden in the befuddling array, it became imperative for Xie Lian to go in and take a look. Xie Lian took a few steps forward before he finally stopped. He thought for a moment before going back and picking up the wedding veil that was on the floor. Patting the dust off it, he held it in his hand before walking toward the building again. The building's red walls looked quite tall, with bricks that looked conspicuously modeled. It actually looked similar to an old temple for the god of the city. In addition, based on Xie Lian's experience, the structure of this building made it probable it was a martial god's temple. Sure enough, Xie Lian raised his head and saw 3 big words engraved in metal on the top of the door. The words said, Ming Guang Temple. The martial god of the north, General Ming Guang. He was precisely the god Ling Wen had mentioned last time in the spiritual array. The General Pei, whose incense stinks throughout the north. No, whose incense sticks burned prosperously in the north. No wonder they hadn't found a Ming Guang temple in the vicinity and found a Nanyang shrine instead. It turned out the Ming Guang temple in this area was within the mountain. However, the temple had long been sealed off by an array. Could it be perhaps there was some connection between the ghost bridegroom and General Ming Guang? So they've found a mysterious secret temple in the middle of the mountain, hidden away. It's a temple to the most popular god in the region, but they hadn't been able to find a temple to that god in the town, which was odd since he's the most popular god in the region. Well, now he knows why. It's because the temple had been lost in the mountains. However, General Ming Guang was someone who was proud of his success and arrogant in his power. His position in the north was very stable. Xie Lian personally didn't believe this kind of martial god would be involved with such a vicious thing like the ghost bridegroom. On the other hand, something like unluckily allowing a vicious thing to occupy their temple when they weren't aware was strange. As for what the truth behind everything was, it was better to make one's conclusions after looking through things more. Xie Lian walked over. The temple door was closed, but it hadn't been locked. Thus, it opened after a single push. After he opened the door, a strange odor assaulted his senses. It wasn't the smell of dust found in a place that had been uninhabited for a long time. No, it was a faint, rotten stench. Xie Lian walked in and closed the front door, making it seem as though no one had entered the temple in the first place. In the center of the main hall, a godly statue was located on the altar for offerings. Naturally, this godly statue depicted the martial god from the north, General Ming Guang. Many humanoid objects, for example sculptures, puppets, and portraits, were all things that were easily infected by evil influences. Therefore, the very first thing Xie Lian did was walk forward and carefully examine the statue. After taking a long look, Xie Lian's conclusion was the godly statue was modeled very superbly. It held a double-edged sword as it wore a belt made of jade on its waist. In addition, it had a handsome face and looked imposing and impressive. There was no problem with the statue. Moreover, the rotten odor wasn't coming from the statue either. Thus, Xie Lian stopped caring about it and turned around. He decided to head back to the main hall to the back of the main hall to take a look. However, the moment Xie Lian turned around, he froze in place as his pupils shrunk. A group of women wearing crimson wedding dresses and covered with veils stood stiffly in front of him. In addition, the faint, rotting odor was drifting over from the bodies of these women. Xie Lian quickly calmed down before counting them. 1, 2, 3, 4. He counted all the way to 17. They were the 17 brides who had gone missing in the Mount Yujun region. The red color on some of the brides' wedding dresses looked faded, and the clothes themselves ragged and old. These brides ought to have been the ones who'd gone missing first. On the other hand, some of the dresses looked brand new. The style of dresses were currently popular. In addition, the smell of a rotting corpse that came from these brides was quite light. These brides ought to have been the ones who went missing recently. Xie Lian thought for a moment before uncovering the veil of one of the brides. The face revealed under the scarlet veil was extremely pale. The skin tone was so white it looked a bit green. Lit by the dim moonlight, she looked terribly frightening. The scariest thing about her, however, was that although the woman's muscles had twisted after death, on that twisted face she still wore a rigid smile. Xie Lian took off the veil of the girl beside her. Once again, the girl's mouth was curled up in the same smile. In fact, all of the dead people in the room wore wedding garments while smiling even in death. Beside his ear, Xie Lian seemingly began hearing that child's voice as they sang that same strange song. New bride, new bride, new bride on the red marriage sedan, eyes brimming with tears, passing the mountain's mound, under the veil, do not hold a rising smile. Suddenly, he heard a strange sound that seemed to originate from outside the temple. It was truly strange. So strange it was hard to describe what it sounded like. In fact, it sounded like two sticks drumming the floor while rolled up in thick fabric. It sounded like there was something heavy attached to the moving thing, so they were dragging it across the floor with difficulty. The noise started off from far away but moved extremely quickly. In a flash, it sounded like it was outside the temple's front door. With a long creak, the door of the temple was pushed open. Regardless whether it was a person who came or something else, it was most likely the ghost bridegroom, and right now it had already returned home. There was no exit at the end of the main hall, and there was nowhere for him to hide. Xie Lian thought for a moment before he saw the bride standing beside him. Immediately he covered his head with the veil before standing within the group of brides, becoming silent and motionless. If there were only 3 to 6 bodies here, then of course it would be easy for others to notice something wrong with a single glance. However, there were 17 corpses. Unless someone counted them one by one like Xie Lian did, it would be very hard for them to immediately realize someone was hiding. He had just placed himself in the crowd of brides when he heard something clop their way into the room. As Xie Lian stood there motionlessly, he began pondering what the sound was. What was it? With the pauses between each noise, it sounded kind of like a person's footsteps. However, what kind of thing would have this kind of footstep? This definitely wasn't the teenager who had brought him here. The guy that walked in a very unhurried and pleasant manner, and the jingling sound of bells that accompanied his steps. Suddenly, Xie Lian thought of something. His heart immediately tightened. This was bad. The height was wrong. After all the corpses were bodies of women, but he was a genuine man and was naturally much taller than the corpses. Although nobody could tell there was an additional person in the crowd, it would be easy for them to notice someone who looked peculiarly tall. But after thinking things through a bit more, he calmed down. He was quite tall. However, the young lady Little Ying had only combed his hair into a simple hairstyle. She didn't do much with it. On the other hand, these brides were all dressed up. Their hair was combed so high, those strands were practically soaring to the sky. In addition, thanks to the phoenix crowns they wore, the top of their heads became a huge chunk taller. Added together, some of the brides wouldn't be much shorter than him. Even if he was tall, it wouldn't be too eye-catching. Just as he was thinking that, Xie Lian once again heard the clopping noise from before. This time, it sounded as if it was very close. After a moment, he heard it again. It sounded it was even closer to him now. Xie Lian finally realized what the ghost bridegroom was doing. It was lifting every bride's veil as it checked the faces of the corpses one by one. If he didn't make a move now, when would he have a better time? The silk cloth flew out before slamming into the ghost bridegroom. Then he heard a loud noise before a black fog began filling up the room. Xie Lian didn't know whether it was poisonous or not. Since he didn't have any spiritual energy protecting his body, he immediately stopped breathing as he covered his nose and mouth with his hand. At the same time, he urged the silk cloth to dance and create wind, in an attempt to quickly disperse the fog. Suddenly, he heard the clopping noises again. Xie Lian squinted before he saw a short and small shadow pass through the temple's front door. Within the temple's door open wide, a lump of black fog began rolling out as it headed toward the forest. Xie Lian made a prompt decision before he immediately chased after it. Unexpectedly, he hadn't taken many steps outside when, within the forest, a blaze of fire soared into the sky. Distantly, a group of yells filled with killing intent drifted over. A youngster's voice sounded especially resonant. Catch the evil creature and help our people get rid of an evil. Catch the ugly creature and help our people get rid of an evil. As for the reward, we can divide it evenly amongst us. That was precisely that young leader. Xie Lian began complaining in his heart. The group of people had said before they were going to search the mountain. Unexpectedly, they actually came. Originally, it would have been fine, since there was that array covering everything up. However, it had been destroyed by that teenager. These blind cats actually encountered a dead mouse. Thus, they found the bridegroom. Xie Lian took another look. The direction those people had been in seemed to coincidentally be the direction the ghost bridegroom had been escaping to. Xie Lian grabbed the silk cloth and rushed over. He began shouting, "Stand there and don't move!" Everyone paused a bit from surprise. Xie Lian wanted to continue talking when the youngster began to fervently ask, "Young lady, were you captured by the ghost bride and forced into Mount Yujun? What's your name? We came here to save you. You can be at ease now." Xie Lian was startled for a moment by these ridiculous words. Then he finally remembered he was wearing a wedding dress. There hadn't been a mirror in the Nanyang temple, so he didn't know what his current appearance was. However, based on the reaction, the young lady Little Ying was pretty good at what she did. This was because, after the people were surprised, they started treating him as a real bride. Moreover, this youngster was probably hoping he was the 17th bride, so it would be easier for him to take the reward. Don't you just love when a bunch of idiot humans rush in with no idea of what's going on? No matter what, however, he couldn't allow these villagers to run all over the place under these circumstances, but he also couldn't guarantee the ghost bridegroom wasn't still running away. Luckily, at this moment, two black-clothed teenagers finally managed to rush over. Seeing this, Xie Lian immediately yelled, "Nan Feng, Fu Yao, come help me!" Unexpectedly, after these two gods looked over by following the sound, they began staring blankly at him. Then they simultaneously backed away 2 steps. Xie Lian had to call them a few more times before they finally reacted. Seeing this, Xie Lian asked, "You guys came from over there, right? Did you encounter anything on the way here?" Nan Feng replied, "We didn't." Hearing that, Xie Lian said, "That's good. Fu Yao, quickly go down this path and do a search. Look in all directions and make sure the ghost bridegroom hasn't escaped." After Fu Yao heard this, he immediately turned around and left. Xie Lian continued speaking. "Nan Feng, guard this place and make sure not a single person can leave. If Fu Yao can't find the ghost bridegroom in the mountains, then the ghost bridegroom must be hidden among this group of people." When they heard this, all the burly men were stunned. The youngster already realized he wasn't a woman and was the first that jumped up. "Nobody can leave? Why should we listen to you? Are there no laws in this land? Everyone, don't listen to them." The youngster hadn't even properly stood up when Nan Feng thrust out his palm. Suddenly, a tall tree with a thick trunk snapped in half and fell to the ground. That's Nan Feng's answer to everything. "They don't respect me? Look at how badass I am!" Everyone immediately remembered this teenager could strike things before completing a full sentence. If they were chopped in half like the pillar he'd broken before, even paying them money would lose any meaning. Thus, everyone shut up. The youngster spoke up again. "You say the ghost bridegroom is within this group, so he has to be in this group? Everyone here has a first and last name. If you don't believe me, come over here and use the fire to light up our faces. Check us over one by one." Xie Lian said, "Nan Feng?" Nan Feng took the youngster's torch and began checking people one by one. Everyone's brows were beaded with sweat. Some people looked tense, some at a loss. Some looked excited, and some extremely lively. Xie Lian couldn't see the cause. Thus, he walked in front of the group and said, "Everyone, please excuse my previous offense. However, I wounded the ghost bridegroom and it escaped, but it couldn't have gone far. These 2 young friends of mine didn't encounter him on the road when they came here, so I'm afraid it may have hidden itself in this group of people. I'll have to trouble everyone to take a close look at one another. Clearly check everyone's face and make sure there isn't anyone you don't know." When they heard the ghost bridegroom was probably within their group, everyone immediately felt their blood run cold. They didn't dare to be careless as they started staring at each other in dismay. Next, they began playing the "you look at me, I'll look at you" game. After they stared at each other for quite a while, suddenly someone yelled in a strange tone, "How come you're here?" Xie Lian's heart skipped a beat as he rushed over and asked, "Who is it?" The youngster snatched someone else's torch before lighting up a corner. He yelled, "This ugly girl!" The person he was pointing at was Little Ying. Under the light, Little Ying's face with her crooked nose and slanted eyes appeared a bit twisted, as if she couldn't stand being exposed so prominently. She raised a hand to block her face from everyone's view. Then she began speaking. I just couldn't feel at ease, so I decided to come and take a look." Seeing how she was convulsing with fear, Xie Lian took away the torch in the youngster's hands before asking the crowd, "How was it?" Everyone started shaking their heads. "There's no one we don't recognize. We've seen everyone here before." Nan Feng asked, "Could it have attached itself to someone's body?" Xie Lian thought for a moment before replying, That would be unlikely. This thing's been solid. Nanfang reminded him. However, it is of the Wrath rank. It's hard to say whether or not it couldn't change its form. While the two of them were hesitating over there, the youngster was the first to start shouting. The ghost bridegroom isn't one of us. You saw it clearly, right? If you saw clearly, let us go. Scattered voices began echoing his words. Xie Lian swept his gaze over them before saying, Everyone, please, stay in front of the temple. Do not leave. Everyone wanted to complain. However, when they saw Nanfang's grave, stern expression, nobody dared to. At this moment, Fu Yao returned and reported, It's not in the vicinity. Hearing that, Xie Lian stared at the dense crowd in front of the temple. He began to slowly declare, In that case, the bridegroom must be within this crowd. Alright, we're going to read one more chapter, because I think this finishes this particular mystery, and that'll be a good note to finish on. Let me drink the rest of my coffee first. This story does a pretty decent job of having some creepy mysteries. I really like a lot of the descriptions and dialogue and stuff. Next time I may have to... I meant to prepare some more things for the stream and just didn't have the time or energy yesterday, but I'm going to try and get some more suitable music for the creepy bits. Yeah, the youngster's an asshole. Alright, Chapter 9. The Mountain's Locked Ancient Temple, the Forest of Hanging Corpses. Fu Yao noticed little Ying was hiding within the crowd of people. Frowning, he asked, Why is there a woman here? Although his tone wasn't aggressive, it didn't contain any goodwill either. Thus, when little Ying heard it, she bowed her head. Xie Lian was the one who replied for her and said she was afraid we'd meet a mishap, so she came to take a look. Fu Yao turned to ask the bystanders another question. Did you guys come up here with her? At first, the people in the crowd hesitated before replying, I don't remember anymore. It's hard to say. That's wrong. When we came up, she wasn't with us, right? In any case, I didn't see her. I didn't see her either. Little Ying hastily spoke up. It's because I secretly followed you guys. The youngster immediately asked, Why did you secretly follow us? Do you have a guilty conscience? Perhaps you're the disguised ghost bridegroom. The moment he said this, the people standing around Little Ying abruptly fled, creating a vast and empty space. Little Ying began waving her hands in a flustered manner before she said, No, I'm Little Ying. I'm really her. Then, she turned towards Xie Lian and said, Young lord, we just met each other. I helped you put on makeup, and I helped you dress and groom yourself. When they heard this, everyone began looking over to stare at him. There were even some people who started to whisper things in bits and pieces. Xie Lian heard phrases like, kink, different from ordinary people. I can't believe it. Coughing twice, Xie Lian explained, This is just a requirement of the mission. A requirement of the mission, you guys. It was only after he turned his head did Xie Lian become aware that Nanfang and Fu Yao were staring at him in a strange manner. In addition, they began slowly moving away in a restrained way. Like, apparently, the makeup will catch. I just love how everyone just so like, oh man, oh no. Am I streaming later? Yes, at about 2-ish. We'll be streaming some Persona 5. Let's see. Being stared at with gazes like that made Xie Lian feel goosebumps all over his body. He asked them, Do you have something to say? How could Xie Lian have known a girl's skill in makeup created such legendary and mystifying results? Little Ying had only taught him how to fix his eyebrows and draw them elegantly, how to powder his face with white powder, and how to dot his lips with deep red rouge. However, if he didn't speak, Xie Lian looked exactly like a gentle, soft, beautiful young lady. Thus, when they looked at him, it made their hearts shake tremendously. They found the scene hard to believe. It made them uneasy from head to toe as they began to doubt life itself. Xie Lian's face still looked like his face, but both Fu Yao and Nanfang felt as if they didn't know who they were talking to when they faced his current appearance. He's so beautiful, they're shaken. They're like, oh my god, this is making me question things about myself. Fu Yao asked Nanfang, Do you have something you wish to say? Nanfang immediately shook his head. I don't have anything I want to say. Xie Lian replied, Perhaps it's better if you did say something. At this time, the people in the crowd began speaking up. Hey, is this a Mingguang temple? This mountain's forest actually had a Mingguang temple? Odd, I've never seen it before. One after another, everyone began looking at the strange sight. However, Xie Lian suddenly said, Yes, it's a Mingguang temple. Nanfang noticed his tone was a bit odd. He asked what's wrong. Xie Lian replied, The north is clearly General Mingguang's territory. It isn't as if the incense burning for him wasn't flourishing, and it's not like his spiritual power is weak. However, why is there only a Nanyang temple under Mount Yujun? It was rather easy to understand why the official would send his prayers to the martial god Heavenly Emperor. After all, he had been the #1 martial god for the last millennium, and his status far exceeded General Mingguang's. Naturally, the higher and more influential you went, the more insured and secure one would be. However, General Mingguang's position was equal to General Nanyang's, and there was hardly any difference between the two of them. If you had to differentiate them, then General Mingguang had 9,000 temples, 1,000 more than Nanyang. Xie Lian couldn't understand why General Mingguang would give up something close and instead seek something far away. He continued speaking and said, normally, even if the Mingguang temple on Mount Yujun is taken over by the ghost bridegroom, resulting in people being unable to find it, one could always build another temple somewhere else. But for what reason would another martial temple be built here? Fu Yao immediately understood and said, there has to be another reason. Xie Lian replied, yes, there has to be another reason that would make the people of Mount Yujun region stop building Mingguang temples. You guys, please lend me some spiritual energy. I'm afraid I'm going to have to go ask again. So in other words, he's like, wait a minute. These people don't have any temples to the most important god in the region? There's only this secret one on the mountain? What's going on? Why is there only this one secret temple and no others? At this moment, someone suddenly shouted, so many brides! When he realized the voice had come from within the temple, Xie Lian immediately turned around. He had told these people to properly stay on the open space outside the temple, but they turned a deaf ear to his instructions and ran inside. Nanfang yelled, the situation is dangerous, don't run about! However, the youngster said, everybody don't listen to them, they won't dare to touch us. We're all good people, would they really dare to kill us? Everyone, get up! The youngster realized the three of them wouldn't seriously hold down their waists and give them a beating. Thus, he began to become absolutely unrestrained. Seeing this, Nanfang's knuckles began to crack, and it seemed like he was trying to restrain himself. However, as a martial god under Nanyang Palace Hall, he really couldn't beat up an ordinary person just because he wanted to. If a supervising heavenly official found out and reported him, then the aftermath wouldn't be fun to deal with. The youngster laughed mischievously before sneering. Don't think I can't tell what you guys are trying to do. You just want to deceive us and make us stay put so you can solve this case all by yourselves and collect the reward. With these instigating words, at least half the people in the crowd became restless. Thus, they followed the youngster and began running into the temple. Fu Yao apathetically brushed his sleeves and said, let them do what they want, this group of wicked commoners. His tone sounded extremely loathing, like he no longer wanted to care about what happened to them. Then, within the Mingguang temple came another loud scream. These are all dead people! The youngster was also greatly shocked as he said, all dead? All dead! What evil rituals! Some of these brides died decades ago. How could their skin not have rotten? However, it didn't take long for the youngster to get over his surprise. It's fine if they're dead. Let's carry the corpses of the dead brides down the mountain. After all, how could the people from their families not buy them back? When he heard that, Xie Lian's gaze gradually sank. After the group of people thought it over, they began thinking this was reasonable. Some sighed, some muttered under their breaths, and some became more cheerful. Xie Lian stood near the doorway of the temple and said, it's better if everyone comes out first. For many years, a breeze hasn't passed through this temple, and death qi has settled in. Energy. If ordinary people breathe it in, it wouldn't be good for them. His words made a lot of sense, and everyone didn't know whether or not they should listen to him. Then little Ying spoke up quietly. Everyone, stop being like this. It's dangerous here. Won't it be better if we listen to this young lord? Come outside and sit down. However, the crowd of people didn't listen to Xie Lian and his team, so how could they listen to her? Nobody paid any attention to her at all. But little Ying wasn't discouraged and repeated her words a few more times. Ignoring her, the youngster began instructing the crowd. Everyone, we must choose the freshest corpses. If the corpse is too old, who knows if their family members are still living in this world? This way, we won't have to waste our strength carrying the corpses down the mountain. Unexpectedly, there were actually people who praised the youngster for being smart and efficient. When he heard that, Xie Lian didn't know whether he should cry or laugh. Then, Xie Lian saw someone moving and immediately warned, don't take off their veils. Those veils can block the death qi and yang qi. The yang qi in your bodies is too strong. If the corpses absorb it, I can't guarantee nothing would happen. However, Because this group of people wanted to pick the freshest corpses, they'd already taken off most of the veils. Xie Lian exchanged a glance with Nan Fang, who'd walked over to the doorway before shaking his head. He knew that he wouldn't be able to stop this crowd of people. After all, it wasn't like he could give them a beating until they vomited blood and couldn't move anymore. If they did that and something happened later, wouldn't their wounds prevent the crowd of people from trying to run away? Xie Lian felt truly quite helpless. After a moment, a buff guy removed one of the bride's veils and exclaimed, "The fuck? This young lady is really beautiful enough to the point she could ascend to the heavens." Everyone began gathering around him as people started discussing her. She probably hadn't even crossed her husband's door yet, right? Dying like that is really too unfortunate. Her clothes are a bit worn out, but this girl is truly the most beautiful. The bride had probably just died recently, because the skin on her face was quite flexible. Someone provocatively asked, "Does anyone dare to touch her face?" The youngster immediately replied, "Why wouldn't we dare to?" The moment he finished saying that, he pinched the corpse's face twice. The youngster only felt the skin beneath his hands felt smooth, making people's hearts feel itchy. He wanted to grope the girl a few more times. Xie Lian surely couldn't continue watching this scene anymore and was about to go over and stop the youngster. However, little Ying rushed over and said, "Don't be like this!" The youngster gave her a push and said, "Don't hinder us big men from doing things." However, little Ying crawled up again and said, "Doing something like this, you truly are just courting wrath from the heavens." This time, the youngster became angry. "Ugh, fuck you, young, ugly person. You're not only ugly, but you're bothersome as well." While he cursed her out, the youngster started kicking at her as well. Xie Lian reached over to grab the back of little Ying's collar and lightly lifted her away from him. Who would have thought that after he'd done that, he'd suddenly heard a bam noise, before the youngster yelled, "Who hit me?" Xie Lian turned around to look. The youngster's head was unexpectedly badly bruised, and it had a big hole. A stone covered in blood fell onto the ground. Little Ying blankly stared at it for a moment before she hastily said, I'm sorry. I was scared and accidentally threw it." However, even if little Ying rushed to admit her wrongs, nobody would believe her. This was because the direction the rock had come from was incorrect. The stone had been thrown into the window that was behind the youngster. Thus, the moment the youngster yelped in pain, everyone looked in that direction. They'd been just in time to see the shadow of a person flit past the window. The youngster yelled in a strange manner, "It was him! It's that ugly creature with the bandages wrapped around his face!" Xie Lian stuffed little Ying into Nan Fang's hands before taking 2 steps over. He then, gently supporting himself by placing his right hand on the window frame, he flipped out the window and began chasing the creature into the forest. A few braver people who wanted to get the reward also followed him and jumped out the window. However, when they reached the edge of the forest, Xie Lian suddenly smelled the reeking odor of blood. Being extremely vigilant, he sensed something was wrong and immediately halted his steps. "Don't go in!" Xie Lian had already spoken to warn them, but those people thought to themselves it was great he wasn't chasing it, because now they could. Their steps didn't stop, and they instead charged right into the forest. The rest of the crowd that had been originally in the temple began rushing out as well. When they saw Xie Lian standing at the edge of the forest, those that weren't too brave began gathering around him to watch. It didn't take too long before they began to hear a few blood-curdling screams. A few black shadows began stumbling out of the forest. They were exactly the people who'd taken the lead in charging into the woods. Staggering out, these black shadows swayed until they reached a spot where the moonlight shined down and illuminated them. At that moment, everyone saw their appearances clearly. They were immediately terror-stricken by the sight. When these people walked into the forest, they were still living humans. So why was it that when they walked out, they were drenched in blood? From their faces to their clothes, these people were covered with bloodstains. It looked as if blood was gushing out of their body. If a regular person had bled this much, it was impossible for them to continue living. However, step by step, these people were still walking over to them. Everyone became so scared they began uniformly scrambling backwards until they were hiding behind Xie Lian. Xie Lian raised his hand and said, "Be calm. The blood isn't theirs." Sure enough, those people said, "That's right! The blood, it's not ours! It's... Everyone, even though their faces were covered in blood, it wasn't able to conceal their completely frightened looks. Following their gazes, the rest of the crowd shifted their eyes over to the forest. It was quite dark, so it was hard to tell what exactly was going on within the woods. Xie Lian grabbed a torch and went a few steps forward as he held the torch up to illuminate the forest. Within the woods, something dripped onto his torch, making a sizzling sound. Xie Lian glanced at his torch before shifting his gaze upward. After contemplating for a moment, he lifted his hands and threw the torch. Even though the torch only illuminated the sky for a short moment, everyone clearly saw what was on top of the trees. Very long black hair, a deathly pale face, a tattered military official robe, and an arm that kept swaying back and forth in the air. More than 40 corpses of men were swaying in the air, hung upside down at various heights on the trees. Xie Lian didn't know how long the fresh blood had flowed for, but it still hadn't dried. Drip, drop, drip, drop. This created the frightening scene of a forest filled with corpses as blood rained down from above. The crowd of people outside were all strong and buff men. However, when would they have ever seen a gruesome sight like this? They were all frightened so badly, they completely blanked out as not a single voice could be heard, and when Nanfang and Fu Yao walked over and saw the sight, both their gazes became focused. After a moment, Nanfang replied, "Green ghost." Fu Yao replied, "Indeed, this is his favorite trick." Nanfang told Xie Lian, "Don't go over. If it's really him, this is going to be a bit troublesome." Xie Lian turned around to ask, "Who are you guys talking about?" Fan Nang responded, God, I dyslexia the words again. Nanfang. A near devastation. Confused, Xie Lian asked, "What's a near devastation? Something approaching the devastation rank?" Fu Yao replied, "Not bad. Near devastation green ghost. He's a wrath that had been assessed by Lingwen Palace Hall, and they claimed his realm was actually awful close to the devastation rank. He's extremely fond of stringing corpses up on trees and making a forest of them, this kind of game. It could be said that it's part of his famous reputation." When he heard Fu Yao's explanation, Xie Lian thought in his heart, the name's truly unnecessary. If he's a devastation, he's a devastation. If he's not, he's not. Just like how there were only the phrases ascended and haven't ascended yet. There was no such thing as near ascending or approaching ascending. Suddenly, Xie Lian recalled how the teenager who'd robbed his sedan had held his hand and led him here. Back then, there had been a moment where the sound of rain hit the umbrella the teenager had opened. Could it be that the reason the teenager opened an umbrella was because he'd wanted to block him from being drenched by this rain of blood? Ah. Xie Lian let out a quiet noise. The two gods beside him immediately asked, "What's wrong?" Xie Lian gave a brief explanation of how he'd met a teenager on the sedan, and how the teenager brought him here. When he finished, Fu Yao said skeptically, "When we came up here, I'd sensed the befuddling array. It had been extremely treacherous. However, you say he destroyed it without any trouble?" In his heart, Xie Lian thought, it wasn't without any trouble. The guy just casually stepped on it. He didn't care about it at all. However, Xie Lian said, "It's right. Do you guys think the near devastation green ghost is him?" Nanfang thought for a moment before he replied, "I haven't seen the green ghost before, so it's hard to say. Did the teenager have any special characteristics?" He said, "Silver butterflies." Just now, when Nanfang and Fu Yao saw the forest of corpses, their expressions could have been considered as completely calm. However, the moment he said that, Xie Lian saw their expressions on their faces immediately change. Fu Yao asked in an incredulous tone, "What did you say? Silver butterflies? What kind of silver butterflies?" Xie Lian sensed he'd probably said something quite important. He replied, "They were silver, but they looked as if they were made out of crystal. They were not alive, though they did look extremely beautiful." Then he saw Nanfang and Fu Yao exchange glances. Both of their complexions became extremely ugly, paling until they were deathly white. After a while, Fu Yao spoke up in a deep voice. "Let's leave. Let's immediately leave." Xie Lian asked, "The ghost bridegroom case hasn't been solved yet. How can we go?" Fu Yao responded, "Solved?" He turned around and smiled grimly. "It seems like you've truly stayed in the mortal realm for too long. This ghost bridegroom is no more than a wrath. And even if the green ghost was responsible for this forest of corpses, he is just a near devastation and would only give us a headache." After pausing again, Fu Yao's tone became quite stern. "However, do you know who the master of those silver butterflies is?" Xie Lian honestly replied, "I don't know." Fu Yao stiffly said, "Even if you don't know, currently we don't have enough time to explain it to you. In short, it's not someone you can go up against. You should hurry back to the heavens and send off some rescue squad soldiers." Xie Lian replied, "Then you return first." Xie Lian explained, "The owner of the silver butterflies didn't reveal any malice, and if he had been hiding his evil intentions and is truly as scary as you make him out to be, I'm afraid it'll be hard for us to escape when we're within the mountain range. At this time, it's best if someone stays back and guards this place. That's why it's better if you return first and see if you can help me by sending over a rescue squad." He could tell Fu Yao didn't want to stay here and deal with all these troublesome things. Since he didn't want to stay, Xie Lian definitely wouldn't force him to reluctantly stay here. So it turns out the guy that helped him out of the sedan is so powerful he terrifies other gods. Fu Yao was a straightforward kind of person. Without another word, he brushed his sleeves and actually left. Xie Lian turned toward Nanfang. He was about to speak up and thoroughly question the small god about the teenager. However, the crowd of people was suddenly in an uproar. Someone exclaimed, "We caught it! We caught it!" With this, Xie Lian didn't have any time to ask Nanfang more questions. He immediately asked, "What did you catch?" Two bloody figures began walking out of the forest. One was a strong and buff man. He'd been one of the people who'd taken the lead in rushing into the forest. Surprisingly, he hadn't been scared into retreating because of the forest's corpse's rain of blood. He could be considered someone daring and fearless. The other figure was the young boy he had been dragging out with his hand in a death grip. The young teenager had bandages wrapped around his head and face in a messy manner. Xie Lian still remembered what the tea sommelier from the little store had said. Rumors state the ghost bridegroom is an ugly creature that lives on Mount June. Because he was born too ugly, no women would like him. That's why his heart gave birth to resentment and why he would snatch other men's brides. At that time, Xie Lian and his team thought it was a rumor. Unexpectedly, there really was a person like this. But him existing was just him existing. Whether or not he was the ghost bridegroom was another matter entirely. Xie Lian was just about to carefully take a look at the bandaged young teenager when suddenly, little Ying rushed over and exclaimed, "You guys are wrong! This isn't the bridegroom! It isn't!" The youngster retorted, "He got caught red-handed at the scene, and you still say he isn't?" He suddenly stopped talking before he looked as if he realized something. "Oh, I kept asking why you were so weird, always continuously going, 'It's not, it's not.' It turns out you were colluding with the ghost bridegroom." Little Ying was startled by his accusation and began repeatedly waving her hands. No, I'm not involved, and he isn't either. He really hasn't done anything before. He's just an ordinary... The youngster aggressively asked, "An ordinary what? An ordinary ugly creature?" He carelessly grabbed the top of the bandaged teenager's head twice. "Then let's take a peek at what the ordinary ghost bridegroom looks like, to be so fond of robbing other men of their wives." His two movements caused some of the boy's bandages to loosen. That induced the young teenager into hugging his head before screaming. His voice was brimming with fear, sounding extremely mournful, yet extremely pitiful as well. Xie Lian grabbed the youngster's elbow and said, "Enough." Hearing the boy's miserable screams, little Ying's tears immediately began rolling down her face. However, when she saw Xie Lian step in, she looked as if she saw her light of hope. Immediately, she clutched his sleeve and begged, Young lord, help him." Xie Lian glanced at her. Little Ying immediately let go of his sleeve in an embarrassed manner. She looked as if she was afraid he would dislike her because she had touched him, and thus wouldn't help anymore. Xie Lian comforted her. "It's all right." He took another look at the bandaged teenager covered in blood. He noticed the boy was looking at him with a pair of bloodshot eyes. In fact, he'd been peeking at him through the gap between the bandages hanging from his arms. The teenager had only stolen a single glance before immediately bowing his head to redo his bandages. Although he hadn't exposed his face, the little skin he had revealed was extremely frightening. It looked as if his skin had been burned by a fierce fire. It wasn't hard to imagine what kind of a horrific face he would have under his bandages. It made other people suck in a breath of cold air, and that reaction made the young teenager shrink in on himself even more. Xie Lian noticed that unexpectedly both little Ying and the teenager cowered in the same manner, as if they didn't see light all year round, and as if they didn't dare to meet people either. As Xie Lian sighed in his heart, the youngster beside him became on guard. "What do you want to do? The ghost bridegroom was caught by us." Xie Lian let him go and explained, "I'm afraid it wouldn't be that simple for you guys to capture the ghost bridegroom. Just now, my friends searched the vicinity for him and didn't find him. This boy only came afterward. The real ghost bridegroom should still be hiding somewhere." Little Ying summoned her courage and said, You want the reward, but you can't randomly grab people and claim they're guilty." When the youngster heard that, he wanted to once again make a move. Ever since this case began, this guy kept causing trouble for Xie Lian. At the end of his patience, Xie Lian waved his hand. The silk abruptly shot out and slapped the youngster, causing him to take a tumble. It seemed that Nanfang had also reached his limit, for he swiftly gave him a kick. Finally, the youngster hit the ground and didn't get up again. The youngster was a specialist in stirring up trouble. Once he stopped moving, the crowd didn't know who they should follow. They became rather well behaved. In fact, even after a few sparse shouts, they couldn't create a disturbance. In his heart, Xie Lian thought, I can finally begin handling affairs. After sizing up the teenager on the ground, Xie Lian asked, were you the person who threw the stone into the window? Although his voice sounded gentle, the teenager still shook like a bamboo sieve. Once again, he took a secret peek at Xie Lian before nodding his head. Little Ying replied in his stead and said, he doesn't want to hurt anyone. He only saw how the youngster looked as if he was going to hit me, so he wanted to help. Xie Lian questioned the teenager again. The corpses hanging in the trees. Do you know what's going on there? Little Ying replied, I don't know what's going on, but I know the corpses weren't hung by him. The teenager kept trembling, but he still began continuously nodding his head. Nan Fang, who'd been staring at him, suddenly asked, do you know who the green ghost Qi Rong is? When he heard the name, Xie Lian became slightly startled. On the other hand, the teenager looked at a loss. He hadn't reacted at all toward the name, and he didn't dare reply to Nan Fang. Little Ying said, he's just scared and he doesn't dare to speak. She kept trying to protect this strange teenager at all costs. Thus, Xie Lian asked in a warm tone, young lady Little Ying, what's the matter with this child? Whatever you know, let me hear it. When she saw Xie Lian, it looked as if Little Ying managed to summon a bit of courage. Even when the flame of the fire illuminated in her face, she didn't hide. Instead, she wrung her hands as she said, he really hasn't done any misdeeds. This child just lives on the mountain. When he becomes too hungry, he'll go down the mountain and steal some food to eat. Once he happened to end up in my house. I saw he didn't really know how to speak, and there were wounds on his face. So I found some cloth bandages to wrap him up, and sometimes I would send him food to eat. Originally, Xie Lian thought these two were perhaps a couple. However, now it seemed as if Little Ying's protection for the teenager were more like an older sister's protection for her younger brother, so much so that she resembled a senior who took after her juniors. Little Ying continued to speak. Afterward, there were a lot of people who began believing he was the ghost bridegroom. I couldn't do anything about it and only hoped someone would quickly catch the evildoer. I thought since the young lord and your companions are powerful, even if you disguise yourself as a bride, at the very least you definitely wouldn't catch the wrong person. This is because he absolutely wouldn't go and rob your sedan. However, who would have known after I left? I heard the youngster and his team intended to go look at the mountain as well. I was too worried, so I secretly followed. She stepped in front of the teenager to protect him, as if she was afraid someone was going to hit him again. Then she began defending the teenager again. He truly isn't the bridegroom. Look at him. Only a few people were able to beat him up into this state. How would he have been able to beat all those military officials who accompanied the sedan? Xie Lian exchanged glances with Nan Fang, both feeling an extreme headache. If what Little Ying said was the truth, then wasn't this teenager completely unrelated to their current assignment? The bandaged teenager, the ghost bridegroom Wrath, the near-devastation green ghost, and they couldn't forget the powerful master of those silver butterflies, someone who could make the complexion of a heavily official's face change when they were brought up in conversation. A small Mount Yujun actually had this many guests who kept visiting it. It really was impossible for people to deal with this. Who was who? Who had a relationship with who? Xie Lian felt his head swimming. Xie Lian rubbed the spot between his eyebrows. For the time being, he didn't ponder over how much of Little Ying's words were genuine or false. Instead, he suddenly recalled the question he'd always wanted to ask. Little young lady, Little Ying, have you always been living in the Mount Yujun area? Little Ying replied, that's right, I've always lived here. I can guarantee he's never done any bad things. In response to that, Xie Lian said, no, I wanted to ask you another question. In the Mount Yujun region, other than the temple here, has any other Mingguan temple been built? Little Ying stared blankly for a moment. After thinking it over, she continued to speak. Yes, they should have been built. When he heard her answer, Xie Lian suddenly had the faint feeling he had stumbled upon something quite important. He asked, why is it under the mountain only Nanyang temples were built and not Mingguang? Little Ying scratched her head before answering. It has been built before, but I've heard whenever they made the decision to build a Mingguang temple, the temple would always catch on fire for no reason before it was completed. Someone said they were afraid General Mingguang had a reason for being unable to safeguard this place. Thus they chose to build a Nanyang temple instead. Nanyang noticed Xie Lian's gaze had become focused. He asked, what's wrong? Xie Lian suddenly realized everything was too simple. The brides that couldn't smile, the temple that caught fire for no reason, the Mingguang temple locked up by the array, General Pei's impressive-looking godly statue, and the ghost bridegroom who suddenly disappeared after it was hit by silk. It was too simple. However, something that had been continuously blocking his line of sight, making Xie Lian aware of this simple fact from the very start. He suddenly grabbed onto Nan Fang and exclaimed, lend me some energy. Being grabbed like this, Nanfang stared blankly before he slapped his palm against Xie Lian's hand. He asked, "What's going on?" Xie Lian dragged him along as he began running. "I'll explain later. For now, think of a way to subdue the corpses of the 18 brides." Nanfang asked, "Aren't you confused? There's only 17 unless we add you." Nanfang... Oh, no, I read that. Xie Lian replied, No. Before, there were only 17 corpses, but now there's 18. Within the corpses of those brides, there's one that's fake. The ghost bridegroom has mixed himself in." Alright, that's the end of the chapter. I was hoping we'd actually finish this, but apparently it's a little longer than I thought. So, we'll do chapter 10 next time, because my voice is a little rough. Thank you guys for joining me in this interesting mystery. I hope you enjoy it. It's really a lovely story with a lot of cool, tense moments, romantic moments, deeply disturbing moments. We will continue next Monday at 11 a.m. Today at, like, a little after 2 maybe, because I gotta go make lunch. We'll continue Persona 5. Tomorrow will be more Persona 5, and then we're watching The Untamed afterward. And we'll continue Tolkien on Wednesday. Tolkien's gonna be Wednesday. This is gonna be other stuff. So, thanks again. If you want to support the channel, be sure to check the description for links to memberships, to Patreon. There's a long list at the bottom of benefits you can get for being a member. There's my social medias that you can follow. You can join the Discord to hang out and chat with us all. Yeah, so that's everything. I'll see you guys later for Persona. And have a good one. Bye.